Am I the a-hole for making my dad choose between me or my stepmother? I, 21F, have identified as a trans woman ever since I turned 15. Growing up, the concept of identity was something I grappled with in silence for a long time, but when I finally found the words to describe who I was, the fear of rejection was heavy. My parents, however, surprised me. Both of them immigrated from Europe in the 90s, and they've always carried a certain level of worldliness and openness that I didn't always see in the families of my peers. They were incredibly supportive from the moment I came out. They didn't just tolerate it, they learned with me. They researched, they asked questions, and they made sure I felt seen. My parents divorced when I was very little. It's one of my earliest memories, the shifting of boxes, the 2 different bedrooms, the dual lives. I lived most of my childhood going between their houses, following a rigid schedule almost every week. 1 week at mom's, 1 week at dad's. It was my normal. Even after the divorce, they remained civil, which I know now is a rarity. My mother married again when I was 17. Her husband has been great, a steady, kind presence who never tried to replace my father but carved out his own space as a mentor and a friend. While I obviously prefer to spend time with my dad because of our shared history and a specific bond we developed over the years, my stepdad was just as nice and supportive of my transition. He never missed a beat with my name or pronouns. Well, years ago, my dad met a woman through his real estate job. He was showing a property and she was a client or a colleague. The details were always a bit blurry because he was so smitten from the start. Martha. That was her name. Martha and him began a relationship very soon after they met. I remember the way his face lit up when he talked about her. He hadn't been that happy in a long time, and as his daughter, all I wanted was for him to have a partner to grow old with. Because of college, I only really get to visit him during the Christmas break. The rest of the year is consumed by lectures, exams, and the life I've built away from home. I introduced myself to Martha as soon as I could. From our initial meetings, she seemed perfectly pleasant. She was polite, soft-spoken, and clearly adored my father. I rooted for my dad, and her all the way. I wanted this to work. They got married in September last year, and I was genuinely happy for them. The wedding was a beautiful, small affair. Martha has one other son, my new older stepbrother. Meeting him was a highlight for me. Growing up as an only child, I always wondered what it would be like to have a sibling, someone to share the burden of parental expectations with, someone to lean on. He was kind, grounded, and we hit it off almost immediately. I was so happy to finally have that sibling dynamic I'd longed for. It all came crashing down just a month ago. I was on a FaceTime call with my dad, just a standard catch-up. I was in my dorm room, sorting through my things, and Martha was sitting near him, partially in the frame. We were talking about my semester and my health, and in a moment of complete normalcy, I made a passing comment about my estrogen. I didn't think twice about it. To me, my medication is just a part of my daily routine, like taking a vitamin. It's been a part of my life for years. The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. Martha's entire demeanor shifted. She looked shocked, her eyes widening as she stared at the screen. She asked if I had problems with my hormones and if I needed any help. She sounded genuinely concerned, but in a way that felt intrusive and strange. I was so confused. I didn't understand why she was reacting like this. I shook my head, almost laughing out of nervousness because the tension in the room on the other side of the screen was palpable. I looked at my dad, expecting him to jump in and clarify, but he looked pale. That was when the floor dropped out from under me. My dad told her I was trans at that moment. I couldn't even process it. I sat there, frozen, staring at the pixels of his face. He had never told her. They had been dating for years, they had been married since September, and he had never mentioned that his daughter was trans. He had let me enter her home, sit at her table, and join her family under a complete lack of transparency. I felt like a secret he had been hiding, a shameful detail he'd tucked away. Before I could say a word, Martha stood up. She didn't scream. She just moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency. My dad looked at the camera, his expression a mix of guilt and panic, and then he hung up on me. The screen went black. I knew she was a religious woman. In the few conversations I'd had with her during my Christmas visits, she'd mentioned her church and her faith. I respected that. I've always believed people are entitled to their beliefs as long as they don't hurt others. But it turns out she's deeply religious in a way that I hadn't fully grasped. I haven't heard a single word from her since that call. No text, no explanation, no apology for the abrupt ending to our conversation. Just silence. My stepbrother reached out to me some weeks later. He sent me a long text saying that he didn't care if I was trans. He told me that since he's also an only child, he would protect his only sister no matter what. Reading those words made me burst into tears. It was the only piece of ground I had to stand on. But the rest of his message was bleak. He told me that Martha had prohibited him from talking to me. She had essentially declared me a persona non grata in their home. Even worse, he told me that she had been relentlessly pressuring my dad to stop supporting my sin. The betrayal from my father felt like a physical weight. How could he have stayed silent? How could he marry someone without telling them such a fundamental truth about his child? He had set us both up for this disaster. He had protected his own comfort at the expense of my dignity. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I called my mother and told her everything. The FaceTime call, Martha's reaction, my dad's silence, and the text from my stepbrother. I have never seen my mother so angry. I could almost see the fire in her eyes through the phone. She has always been my fiercest advocate, and seeing her child treated like a shameful secret was more than she could stand. She didn't wait. She called my dad immediately. I was on the line for part of it, and she gave him a blistering ultimatum. She told him he needed to put some respect between me and Martha, that he could not allow his wife to disparage his daughter or treat my existence as a sin. She told him that his silence was a form of complicity. In that same call, the emotions finally boiled over for me. I spoke up, my voice trembling but certain. I told him that if things weren't changing, if he wasn't going to stand up for me and demand that I be treated with basic human decency, then he needed to choose. It was her or me. It's breaking my heart because I never, ever wanted it to come to this. I'm not a person who likes ultimatums. I'm not someone who wants to tear a marriage apart. I love my dad. I love my stepbrother, who is now caught in the middle of his mother's prejudice. And the worst part is, at one point I really did love Martha too. I thought we were becoming a family. Now I'm sitting here in my dorm, staring at my phone, waiting for a choice that I shouldn't even have to ask him to make. I feel like I'm mourning someone who is still alive. I feel like I'm losing my father to a version of himself I don't recognize, a man who would rather hide his daughter than face an uncomfortable conversation with his wife. I keep replaying that FaceTime call in my head. The way she looked at me, the way he looked away. I wonder if he ever intended to tell her, or if he was just going to let me live a lie every Christmas for the rest of my life. I wonder if he realizes that by not choosing me, he's already made his choice. My stepbrother still texts me in secret, checking in, telling me he's trying to talk sense into his mom, but he says she won't budge. She views my very existence as an affront to her faith, and she views my father's support as a betrayal of their marriage. My dad is stuck in the middle, but the middle is no place for a parent to be when their child is being dehumanized. I feel guilty for the ultimatum, but I also feel a burgeoning sense of self-preservation. I can't go back to that house. I can't sit at that Christmas table knowing that my stepmother views me as a sin, and my father thinks I'm something to be hushed. I'm trying to build a life where I am proud of who I am. I can't let his fear pull me back into the closet he built for me without my permission. So, am I the a-hole? Update. It's been a few weeks since everything blew up, and I finally have something resembling an update. Things didn't stay in that tense, quiet limbo for long. It escalated, just not in the way I expected. After that call, where my mom confronted my dad, and I gave the ultimatum, there was silence for a couple of days. Not the usual kind where people are busy or avoiding each other for a bit, but the kind that feels deliberate. My stepbrother still managed to text me here and there, mostly short messages just to make sure I was okay. He hinted that things at home were getting worse, that his mom wasn't letting it go, and that my dad was being pushed harder than before. Then it all came to a head. My dad called me out of nowhere one evening. His voice sounded different right away, not hesitant like before. There was something steadier about it, like he had already made up his mind about something. He told me he needed me to stay on the line, because he was going to put me on speaker. I didn't really know what to expect, but I stayed quiet. Martha was there. I could hear movement in the background, the kind that comes with someone pacing or unable to sit still. The tone of the conversation was tense almost immediately. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't going to be a calm discussion. She started in on the same points my stepbrother had warned me about. It wasn't loud at first, but it was sharp. The focus was on how my existence was somehow disrupting her home, how my dad was encouraging something wrong, how this wasn't what she had signed up for when she got married. It wasn't framed as confusion anymore. It was blame. At some point, it shifted into threats. Not dramatic, shouted ultimatums, but the kind that are said in a controlled voice that somehow lands heavier. She made it clear she expected my dad to distance himself from me if he wanted their marriage to work. There was talk about boundaries, about what she would and wouldn't tolerate, and every version of that expectation pointed in the same direction. That was when my dad finally stepped in. He didn't raise his voice, which somehow made it hit harder. He cut through everything she was saying and told her, very clearly, that I am his daughter, and that wasn't up for negotiation. There wasn't any hesitation in it this time. He said if she couldn't respect me, if she couldn't treat me like family, then the marriage wouldn't survive that. He didn't dress it up or soften it. He told her that if she expected him to choose, then she needed to be prepared for the outcome. The room went quiet after that. It was the first time since this started that I didn't feel like I was the one on unstable ground. For once, it wasn't me being explained away or avoided. Her reaction didn't come immediately. When it did, it wasn't acceptance. She shifted the blame instead. It turned into how my mom and I were interfering, how we were creating problems where there didn't need to be any, how we were trying to tear apart her family. The way she framed it, this entire situation existed because we refused to stay quiet. It didn't land the way she seemed to expect. Before anything else could spiral, my stepbrother stepped in. I hadn't even realized he was in the room at first, but his voice came through clear enough that there was no mistaking it. He didn't hedge or try to smooth things over. He went straight to the point. He said the person he's been dating is trans. Everything stopped. It wasn't said for shock value. It was direct and intentional, and it completely changed the dynamic in the room. He made it clear that this wasn't some distant issue to him or something abstract that only affected someone else. Then he laid it out in a way that didn't leave room for interpretation. If she wanted to keep a relationship with him, she needed to drop it. Completely. There wasn't any drawn-out argument after that. He made it clear that he would choose his partner over her if it came down to it. No hesitation, no qualifiers. That seemed to hit in a way nothing else had. For the first time since all of this started, she didn't have a response ready. There wasn't a counter-argument or a reframing. It just stopped. The silence stretched long enough that it became uncomfortable. From what I could tell, she was completely thrown off by it. When she did react, it wasn't anger in the same controlled way as before. It broke down into something messy. She started crying, and the narrative shifted again. Suddenly, it was about how everything was being taken from her, how her family was being turned against her, how she didn't recognize what her life had become. Somehow, even then, it circled back to me. She said I had destroyed everything. Hearing that didn't land the way it might have before. Maybe it's because, by that point, too much had already been said. Maybe it's because, for once, I wasn't the only one she was directing that blame at, and it made it easier to see it for what it was. Either way, it didn't carry the same weight. My dad didn't back down after that. He didn't try to calm things by agreeing with her or asking me to compromise. He stayed firm on the same point he made earlier. Respect wasn't optional, and if she could manage that, then the marriage wasn't going to continue. The call didn't end in any kind of resolution. There wasn't a moment where everyone came to an understanding or agreed on next steps. It ended because there wasn't anything left to say without repeating the same arguments. Since then, things have been strange. My dad has been checking in more regularly. Not in a way that feels forced, but like he's trying to rebuild something that he realizes he almost lost. He hasn't tried to justify what happened before or explain why he kept it from her for so long. There's been an acknowledgement there without it turning into excuses, which is new. My stepbrother has been more open with me too. He doesn't have to hide our conversations as much now, at least not in the same way. From what he's told me, the house is tense but quieter. His mom hasn't brought it up again directly, at least not to the same extent. It's like she hit a wall she wasn't expecting and doesn't know how to push past it. There hasn't been any kind of apology from her. No message, no attempt to reach out. The silence from her side is still there, just different now. Less like avoidance, and more like she's regrouping. I don't know what's going to happen with their marriage. It feels like it's balancing on something fragile, and it could go either way depending on what she decides to do next. For the first time, though, it doesn't feel like that outcome is resting entirely on me or something I said. I'm still processing everything. The ultimatum was never something I wanted to give, and I don't feel good about how things got to that point. At the same time, seeing my dad actually stand up for me changed something. It doesn't erase what happened or how it started, but it matters. I haven't made any plans to visit yet. That part still feels uncertain. There's too much unresolved, and I'm not willing to put myself back into that environment without knowing where things stand. For now, I'm focusing on finishing my semester and keeping some distance while things settle, if they even do. It's not the kind of resolution I hoped for, but it's not the one I was bracing myself for either. I guess that's where things are. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.